2 Samuel chapter 2. Now, a couple of things here before I get too far down the road. This is one of those series, or one of those places, and I remember when I preached this at Bethel, where was I last? It was at Baldwin. My world is a little convoluted. It's difficult. I'm going to talk through chapters 2 through 4 because they really represent a transition period, another one of those transition periods in the life of David. I've given you a little sense of that in the review. It has been a long time, I guess you would say, since Israel has really thrived under a unified kingdom. You could say that Saul, of course, was king, but with all of the struggles there, it's just been a very long time coming. And part of the problem, and I have this in your notes, but it's a word that you should probably write down because I think it's never really gone away in our culture, and it's the word syncretism. And it simply means that what happens is a people who are a distinctive people, and that's what Peter calls us. We are a peculiar. I love how that word comes out in the King James. You are a peculiar people. Yes, we are. But we are peculiar because of our belief, the nature of our belief. And that has always been at odds with a worldview that suggests you can go through the line like you go through at Mr. Burger and choose what you want. And that's what syncretism really is. It suggests that we have a little bit of this, we have a little bit of godliness, and then, well, let's grab a little bit of that self-determination over here, and a little bit of this over there. And how about a little, all truth is God's truth, and no matter whether you're a Mormon or a Hindu, we're all going to the same place, and that's syncretism. And if you remember, and whether or not he went over that in Deuteronomy, I don't know, obviously. But the great challenge for everyone going into the promised land was that God said, I don't want you to mess with anybody else. I want you to be a distinctive people, worship me and worship me alone, and that's what I want. And unfortunately, as you know in Old Testament history, God's people never really were successful in eliminating all of those other isms. And so all of that has constantly been a problem, even up to now. And so as David moves into what is going to be the monarchy years, there is this transition that has to unfold, and that's really chapters 2 through 4, and I'll get there in a minute. I thought it was important, as a result of 1 Samuel 31, to kind of just probably more so put this in your notes than make this a series of talking points. But with suicide being what it is in our culture, and I understand that no one really wants to talk about it. I also understand that suicide in some way or another really touches most of the families in our world. It has touched my wife's family, at least the extended family, and it is a horrible thing. But I want us to make sure, at least in my opinion anyway, that we have the right view. Because the Roman Catholic Church, of course, has suggested that if someone commits suicide, they are an abomination and dispatched from any opportunity of eternal life and all of that. That may be a little simplistic, but that's basically it. So I want to just spend a couple of minutes, given what Saul and a number of others, what you find in the Old Testament, is kind of just working through briefly, or maybe it's just me sharing a couple of things that kind of give you a sense. A definition, first of all: suicide is to purposely take one's own life out of misdirected self-love, and I think that is a correct way of looking at it. There is a moral difference between volitional suicide and suicide due to psychological factors such as chemical imbalance, clinical depression, and an altered mental state. That simply means there's a difference between the person who willfully decides to take his life, in my opinion, and that person who does that under duress of one thing or another. And there are a whole lot of others out there. Clinical depression and just difficulties that cause a person to be in that situation. Now, I'm going to make a few distinctions quickly. Between suicide and self-willed sacrifice of one's life, there's a difference. Self-sacrifice might include military service, dying in the defense of a friend, ministering to the sick, mission work, etc. And in fact, Jesus says in John 10:18, I think, and I don't have this, I think I've got it. No one takes my life from me. I have the power to lay it down and the power to take it up. That's not suicide. Okay? Secondly, suicide almost always occurs in response to suffering or anticipated suffering. And that might include all kinds of emotional and physical kinds of things. Quickly, I want to suggest the arguments for suicide usually fall along a certain line. It's my body. It's my body. I'll do with it what I want. Sounds a lot like my body, my choice, doesn't it? That we use for abortion. We have, and I want to be, we have come to a place in our culture where we literally worship our body and our control over it. And, you know, I said, no, our body is not our own. 1 Corinthians 6, Paul says, your body is not your own. You were bought with a price. So glorify your body, which, and I'll have this verbatim, but which is God's. God is the sovereign sustainer of our life. So I know I'm talking to the choir, okay? Secondly, we are image bearers and human beings who live in community. When suicide occurs, grief ensues with guilt and strained relationships. And that I've seen that in operation. And especially with parents who struggle with a son or a daughter who's committed suicide. There is, what did I not see coming? Deb's cousins in Oklahoma, a very large family, very godly family filled with pastors and missionaries. A young man went up into his room. Everybody, they saw nothing going on. He went up into his room and drank a couple of gallons of antifreeze and took his own life. Thirdly, encouraging suicide. Isn't this a happy topic? I'm sorry. I'll move beyond it, but it is important that we understand, at least I think, some key points here. Encouraging suicide suggests, here's the thing that really bothers me too, that there is no answer to despair and no comfort in affliction. Because we have, in a sense, thrown off any connection with the God, the very God who can help us. Right? So on one side, you have this enormous despair. And normally that despair could be met in community, a community of believers who say, we understand the nature of your hurt, and we want to respond in a way by bringing good Christian truth into your life, importing that into your life. But we've rotted that out. We've worked that out and removed that very core of Christian truth in community, in the communities that we live in, and so we have nowhere to go. I'll just give you some biblical content really quick, or some reference to that. Satan attempted Jesus to commit, or tempted, it should be tempted, not attempted, tempted Jesus to commit suicide. The Philippian jailer proposed suicide, and the Great Tribulation. You have many will attempt to commit suicide. I find this interesting. but will be unable to find any solace in death. Saul, of course, Saul's armor bearer, Ahithophel, Zimri, 1 Kings, and Judas Iscariot, all are examples, and I may have left some out. It's not exhaustive for sure. Let me just give you some perspective if I can, and then we'll move on, because I think it is important. And by the way, here's the thing. I think the church, though much maligned, stands at the forefront yet today of advancing, not itself, but advancing God for the purpose of meeting hurting people where they are, okay? That's part of what happens in a church that can't happen in a parachurch organization. And I think there are still lots of hurting people out there who were not raised as believers and are in despair and need somebody to come alongside them. And that's why a church on this corner or a church on that corner serves a critical role. I mean, here's the thing. When I was at Lakeshore Pregnancy Center, there would be these people come through the door, these women come through the door, and sometimes men, sometimes couples, but they would be in this pressure situation, or they would come to us as a result of having an abortion and wanting somebody to talk to, and they have been living in the Holland area for all of their lives, for 20, 30 years, and they have never heard the gospel. How is that possible? Because we've Christianized the entire county, we thought. And so as a director, what I always wanted to do was, could I find people within local churches that I knew or where that person lived, whether it was in Allegan or Allendale or Holland or what was the other one, Grand Haven? Can I find churches where I can plug hurting people and attach them to people who care? So I'm making this plea to you, as I would make a plea to the folks in Baldwin or wherever else I've been, that one of the reasons for God's necessity of the local church, or his primacy of it, is that it can stand in the gap to this day when people who have no Christian connection at all, or no religious upbringing, or no understanding of God, that we can reach out to them, because the hurt only continues to grow. And I didn't give you the number of suicides because I get sometimes kind of tired of statistics. But let me just say to you that suicide is on the increase because despair is on the increase. And I didn't get into all the mercy killing stuff because that's another day. I just wanted to give you an overview. So that's my point here. Number one, in the concluding thoughts, and this is interesting. Maybe you have the answer to this. All of the biblical example of successful suicides are men. Boy, I don't know what to do with that. I mean, I could... Is it, and again, I don't know if their research, and I'm not trying to be a smart aleck here, is it connected to the fact that women generally are better relationally than men and find themselves less at the edge of despair? I don't know. All of the examples, secondly, are men of less than stellar character, and none are praised for their actions. All were spiritually bankrupt. These are all of the biblical examples, and went through a period of spiritual demise before the suicide. If you want to use Saul as a case in point, you can use a number of other, Judas as well. Number 4, many of the examples were in pain or afraid before the suicide. Maybe most importantly, it seems to me, suicide is not the unpardonable sin, but suicide is judged to be sinful. There's my distinction. Okay? I think the Roman Catholic Church says that suicide means you can't get out of purgatory and get to heaven. careful not to have that down exactly, but for them that's the thing. Suicide is number 6 is a sin against God. As the creator and sustainer of our lives, it rejects God's sovereignty with regard to life. Suicide is a violation of the 6th commandment. Suicide clouds the image of God and the sanctity of human life. Suicide seems to represent poor stewardship of one's body. Suicide depreciates the value of human suffering. Seems to me. Suicide fails to recognize the unnatural nature of death. So that, at least, I feel better, at least from a public sense. I do not want anyone misunderstanding that while suicide is sinful and judged to be that in fact it is it represents a failure to secure eternal life. There are two different issues there. So anyway, so I'm gonna turn a corner now. I feel better, and aren't you glad that I feel better? Okay, good. Now my question to you, you don't have to answer this really, is: does God move fast enough for you? Just give me a nod, yes or no. Does God move fast enough for you? Good. I'm glad you said that, because I thought I was going to be all by myself. God hardly ever moves fast enough for me. Okay? I am in a spot right now where he is not, sometimes, and I am not being irreverent, but sometimes I would say, God, would you come down out of that cloud and tell me what to do? Okay? That's what I want to know. What do you want me to do? Okay? I said that when I was ready to get married at age 17. God, come down out of that cloud and find Debbie for me. And so what you're looking at and what you're looking at now is kind of a confusing 2 chapters, because we are waiting, and David is waiting for God to fix things. And as confusing and conflicted as the Middle East is right now, I mean, the Houthis, I guess that's the correct term, disrupting shipping in the Red Sea, and all of these things tied to Gaza and Hezbollah and Hamas and all of that thing, it seems like, it's just a confusing mess. In an Old Testament theological economy, where we are in this book right now, David finds himself in a series of circumstances where he has to execute care, I would say good diplomacy, and patience to wait on the Lord. And by the way, whoever becomes president next, can we please have some of that patience, diplomacy, and the ability to wait on the Lord? So I want to suggest, as a big picture here this morning, that living for Christ is made extremely difficult by a world system or a depravity that seeks its own gratification and glory. Stop a minute and think about that. Living for Christ, you, me, living for Christ is made more difficult in a world such as we have, where everybody is out for his own piece of the pie, right? I'm listening to this wonderful documentary based on a book by David McCullough, John Adams. And it's interesting, sometimes we think that we've just invented chaos. But John Adams, in the late 18th century, 18th century, is struggling with the same issue. Finding a course that seeks to put the best needs of the country, or I should say the needs of the country, ahead of individual pursuits. And it was the challenge for Adams. It was been the challenge for every president and every government since then. But it's what we are facing here. Anytime we are living for Christ, and mark it down, and sometimes that kind of thing happens in churches, in the world, everywhere. But living for Christ is made more difficult because of a world system where everybody is seeking his own gratification and glory. And that's exactly what's going on in 2 Samuel 2 through 4. It's Abner and Joab and Ishbosheth and all of these guys. And somehow David and somehow you and I have to navigate a world of serving Christ in a world where everybody's seeking their own. I reminded my students yesterday that I'm teaching this class at Grace that I kind of wound up on an afterthought in leadership, that no matter where you're going, whether you're going to a pastorate, whether you're going to a business setting, or whether you're going in the medical field, I really do think Mark 10:45 is a great verse. The Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and give his life a ransom for many. And so I'm not necessarily going to go over, you'll be happy, you'll be thankful. And Don will get to the appointment with Judy, and I won't be in the steam like doghouse, is that I don't go over every verse between 2 Samuel 2 and 4. Because it is messy. And David, I'm just kind of preparing you, David has to chart a course, and my sentence here is, I think, right. Following in convoluted times is difficult, but comes with its own blessings. If we can live by principle that says, I will move when God tells me to move, I will act the way God wants me to act, and I will patiently know when to make that jump or not, then there are blessings ahead for us. But it is hard. I don't know how else to say it. It's hard, and I've discovered after about 33 years in the ministry that there's a lot of people in and out of church who have their own agendas, and they want to try to force them on you or on everyone else. Anyway, so that's where we're heading here. And so I'm going to do something that, I don't have any particular applications, because I think they're built into the three observations that I had this morning from these chapters. And so it's kind of we're going to kind of step back, and I'll probably read a lot of text, but I want you to kind of see how this is flowing along these three observations that I want to make this morning. Number one, relationships or alliances may be complicated, but godliness remains the expectation. Let me say something that isn't in your notes. Just because living for Christ is difficult doesn't mean you get a free pass to live on your own way. Okay? You're not going to get it. In other words, I can say to God, well, you don't understand, God. I had this church way back when, and they weren't good. They were hard. And I need some extra. I want you to give me some extra wobble room for that. Sorry, Mark. The goal is the same. Preach well, love people. So, just because it's hard doesn't mean we get a free pass to act like we want to. All right? It doesn't work that way. So I want you to, we'll jump into the text. Chapter 2, 2 Samuel 2. Now it came about afterwards, in other words, after the death of Saul, after the lament, after all of these things, David inquired of the Lord, saying, shall I go up to one of the cities of Judah? And the Lord said to him, go up. So David said, where shall I go up? And he said, to Hebron. Okay? To the city, to the old place, to the religious center. So David went up there, and his two wives, Ahinoam the Jezreelitess and Abigail the widow of Nabal the Carmelite. And David brought up his men who were with him, each with his household, and they lived in the cities of Hebron. Then the men of Judah came and anointed king over the house of Judah. Woo! He's king of the southern areas. Secondly, and they told David, saying, this is now latter part of 4, it was the men of Jabesh Gilead who buried Saul. And David sent messengers to the men of Jabesh Gilead and said to them, may you be blessed of the Lord, because you have shown the kindness to Saul your Lord and have buried him. You know, it's always good to say thanks. Now, I'm not perfect at this, and I'm looking at people who have sent me cards. And I know I haven't sent a thank you to all of you, but my mother was she could be Genghis Khan. Whatever you get, you send a thank you card, and that better be in the mail in a week or so. And even at 40 years of age, did you send thank you cards? No, Mom. Do it. My mother was a force to be reckoned with. But there, you know, it's hardly ever inappropriate to say thank you. And I want you to notice something about relationships here, and a course, and really to me it relates to leadership and a force of character. If we can always remember who has been part of our success and our joy and the furtherance of our success, we ought to remember that. Because seldom do we ever get somewhere on our own. So the first thought is, if you notice back at the lament, I'm not going to go back there other than this comment, David attributes no blame towards Saul, rather describes any hostility as beyond David's control. While humble in his intent, it is likewise an act determined to bind the nation together. In other words, in moving forward, he does not attribute guilt and bitterness towards the guy that wanted to take his life, which to me is a remarkable attitude. He does not approach that lament by saying, you guys were nasty, this family nearly killed me. He is only uplifting. Now, it's interesting because obviously that was not the case in his life, but there was no good point. David assumed, I think rightly, wisely, that there was nothing to be gained by beating up the house of Saul or those people who still had leanings that way. Secondly, the favor of Jabesh Gilead, David, because these people are outside the boundaries of Hebron. And they may have other leanings too. A commendation meant to encourage a people of the north for their care of the body of Saul. And while I do think it is genuine, I think David was well aware of its implications. It never hurts to thank and encourage people who have done something for you or for the nation that you think's positive. And, you know, you can say, you know, well, it's politically minded. That's a hard line to parse. I simply have to rely on the general character of David and his actions, and I think he's charting a course that understands the power of relationships. Now, if that's the good stuff, there is some troublesome stuff too. And, you know, if you notice all of the family increasing in chapter 3, I think there's two things going on there. I think he's complicating his life Those of you who are married to one person understand how complicated that can be. By the way, every once in a while I watch one of these documentaries where, Mormon people are on and they're talking about how, they interview their 4 wives. And they say, "How is it? Oh, we just have a grand old time." I don't believe that, because I know how hard it is to live with her. Oops. I know how hard it is to live with me. It's Valentine's Day. We're going out to lunch. So don't tell me that increasing your family, your wives, let's see, there's Monday, Tuesday. Don't tell me that doesn't complicate things. And the other thing is, it was never part of God's plan. Interestingly enough, wouldn't you know, you knew it had to get here. Our culture is increasingly accepting multiplicity of partners. And you know who are the resistance? We who are the self-righteous, biblically minded people, one man, one woman, are the ones that are keeping everybody away from their fun, so to speak. So I'm giving you both sides of the street here. I think David is moving well with his relationships with others, poorly with his own family. Verse 8, one last thing on this relationship issue. But Abner, the son of Ner, commander of Saul's army, had taken Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, and by the way, his name has a kind of Baal pagan background there at some point. And anyway, and brought him over to Mahanaim, or Mahanaim. He made him king over Gilead, over the Asherites, over Jezreel, over Ephraim, and over Benjamin, even over all Israel. Ishbosheth, Saul's son, was 40 years old when he became king over Israel and was king for 2 years. The house of Judah, however, followed David. The time of David was king in Hebron all over the house of Judah for 7 and 6 months. So here you have a situation now that is cropped up. Who is it that is going to unify the nation? David, of course, has taken the monarchy in Hebron, but you have these competing alliances. And Abner, there is this, we'll get to this in a second, but what is David to do in this situation? There is a divided alliance here. There is a ununified, a lack of unity in the kingdom. And the reason is because, then secondly, it leads me to my second observation, egos may be difficult to master, but godly spirituality and an authenticity must guide us. Our egos are probably our worst enemy. And I think about a lot of the problems that pastors get themselves into and leaders in Christian movements get themselves into has a lot to do with pride and their inability to handle their own ego. The world does not revolve around me, is the message to my children and the message to myself. So, first of all, what you have is Abner here. And I've given you a note. We as men and women we tend to have long memories, and we tend to forget. We don't forget, I should say. And I've given you I wonder if Abner remembered David's taunting. And I'll only mention, Abner is present after the defeat of Goliath. He's present when he was embarrassed by David in 1 Samuel 26. Do you remember that? David says to Abner over there, "Aren't you taking care of your king?" Abner may not have forgotten that. So if you look what happens here in the latter part of chapter 2, now Abner the son of Ner went out from Mahanaim to Gibeon with the servants of Ishbosheth the son of Saul, and Joab the son of Jeriah and the servants of David went out to meet them by the pool of Gideon, and there's going to be a contest. Who's best? Well, we're going to solve this. So they're having a contest. That's verse 14. Abner said to Joab, "Now let the young man arise and we'll hold a contest." And Joab said, "Let them arise." So they picked a number of individuals here, okay? So they arose, verse 15, and went over by count, 12 for Benjamin, and Ishbosheth the son of Saul, and 12 for the servants of David. They're going to go at it. Who's stronger? I'm going to stop here and say, doesn't this kind of remind you of junior high school? When I was in elementary school, you'll probably never invite me back after this. When I was in elementary school, can't even say the term now because it would be offensive, but we had this game called Smear the Queer. Basically, we ran around the playground pushing girls down. A bunch of us boys. And principal got mad and said, "If you don't stop, we're gonna sit you in the office." This is by the way, back when you could still spank children in school. Now that didn't happen, so maybe you can invite me back. But we didn't quit. We played our little childhood game in the playground of Canavan Elementary School. And the principal stuck a bunch of us boys in the office at lunchtime for an entire week. Never did it again. But this almost reminds me, and I know it's a little deeper than that. This was how contests were solved in some ways in the Old Testament. But if you notice here, verse 16, each of them seized his opponent by the head, and we didn't do any, obviously, these things, and thrust the sword in his opponent's side so they fell down together. Anyway, verse 17, that the day the battle was very severe, and Abner and the men of Israel were beaten before the servants of David. Now the three sons of Zeruiah were there, Joab, Abishai, and Ashiel. And Ashiel was swift-footed and one of the gazelles which is in the field, and he's not going to let it go. He's young, with a big ego, and he's going to take on Abner. Okay? He pursued Abner, 19, did not turn to the right or the left, which is a way of saying in the Old Testament he's intent. Then Abner looked at him and said, "Is that you, Ashiel?" And he said, "It is I." So Abner said to him, "Stop," virtually. Don't turn to your right or turn to the left, and take hold of one of the young men for yourself, and take for yourself the spoil. But Ashiel was not turning aside from following him. Abner repeated it, break off your pursuit. So think of it this way. This is a very young man, not really particularly gifted in battle, against a seasoned warrior. Who do you think is going to win? And it's interesting to me that a number of mistakes that I've made in my life were maybe because I couldn't control my ego and tell myself no. Verse 22, Abner repeated it, "Turn aside from following me. Why should I strike you to the ground? How then could I lift up my face to your brother Joab?" In other words, this is going to have consequences. However, 23, he refused to turn aside. Therefore, Abner struck him in the belly with the butt end of a spear. so that the spear came out of his back. And he fell there and died on the spot. And it came about that all who came to the place where Asahel had fallen and died stood still. Okay, well, but Joab and Abishai pursued Abner now. And when the sun was going down, they came to the hill of Ammah, which is in front of Giah, by the way of the wilderness of Gibeon. And the sons of Benjamin gathered behind Abner and became one band. So they stood on the top of the hill. Then Abner called to Joab. Interesting statement he makes here. Shall the sword devour forever? Do you not know that it will be bitter in the end? Now, there's something prophetic about that, and I mean prophetic in the sense of it's not going to end well, is it? It's almost as if Abner says to Joab, look, this can only end badly. Don't you think we should stop this? And I find that kind of interesting. I want to pause there and think about that for a minute. How many times has someone said to you in your life, or you wish they would have said to you in your life, you know, this is not going to end well. Let's break this off before it really hurts somebody. And you were wise enough to either do it and understand that, or you didn't listen and you went ahead and discovered afresh why you should have listened. And I'm just reeling that back in for a minute for me. Because we all have egos. We all like to let's just admit it. We all like to have our egos fed. And it is very hard sometimes to reel that momentum or to stop that momentum. Shortly after I had my license, I had a 66 Dodge or Plymouth Valiant. Anybody remember that? With a slant 6 engine. And I hadn't been driving very long, and we attended church in Akron. I lived in Medina, 20 miles away, and for some reason my parents let me drive to a church event we were having in Akron, and it was New Year's Eve, and it was horrible weather. Ice and snow everywhere. What were my parents thinking? I come up in this street to a top, and I didn't realize it. I was going too fast, and that 66 Valiant hit that ice, and there were a bunch of cars parked for a New Year's Eve party, one of them being a large Pontiac with a big set of lights. And I tried to stop, but my momentum carried me into the lights of that Pontiac. And that ended the life of the 66 Plymouth Valiant. Because as a young driver, I could not control the momentum of that vehicle on that ice, and it went right in. And I knew I was in trouble. And the worst thing I had to do was I had to go to the door and say, I've just hit your Pontiac. And I'm like 16 years old. So, you know, there are times in the absence of even another individual. But I find it interesting here. It's Abner, for crying out loud. Not exactly a character giant here, a force of character. But shall the sword devour? In other words, is there ever an end to this? In Joab 27, as God lives, if you had not spoken, surely then the people would have gone away in the morning, each from following his brother. So Joab blew the trumpet, and all the people halted and pursued Israel no longer, nor did they continue to fight anymore. So it's a difficult thing. The difficulty of watching it all unfold before your eyes and recognizing how little we have control over our lives. Because everybody wants to orchestrate their own best future. Now, chapter 30 or verse 30 in chapter 2. Quickly, Joab returned from following Abner. Continued struggle. Verse 31, the servants of David had struck down many of Benjamin and Abner's men, so the 360 men died. It's just a mess. It's chaos. Chapter 3, now there was a long war between the house of Saul and the house of David. David is growing steadily stronger. I've mentioned the stuff about David's family, the things about, so I won't go there again. But in verse 6 now, you have another ego issue. It came about while the war between the house of Saul, this is verse 6, and the house of David, that Abner was making himself strong in the house of Saul. And so what does he do? He does that thing that is meant to embarrass, to ridicule. Verse 7, Saul had a concubine whose name was Rizpah, and the daughter of Aiah. And Ishbosheth said to Abner, why have you gone into my father's concubine? Here's the deal. At some point, Abner realizes he's on the wrong side of his future. And he throws Ishbosheth under the bus, as it were. Abner was very angry over the words of Ishbosheth and said, am I a dog's head that belongs to Judah? Today I show kindness to the house of Saul, your father, and to his brothers and his friends, and have not delivered you into the hands of David, and yet today you charge me with a guilt concerning the women. Well, he actually did do the woman thing, and he didn't like being called down for it, I think. May God do so to Abner, and more if the Lord has sworn to David. I do not accomplish this for him, to transfer the kingdom from the house of Saul and establish the throne of David over Israel and over Judah, and from Dan to Beersheba, which is another way of saying in the Old Testament, from north to south. In other words, I'm throwing you under the bus. I'm now siding with David because I think I can get a better deal with him. I think there's a greater future for me there than with you. Verse 11, and he could no longer answer Abner a word because he was afraid of him. Yes, I guess so. And so now, it just gets worse. And so now, and I'll save you some time here. Abner sends messengers to David and says, can I come up with a good deal with you? Look at verse 13. He said, good, I will make a covenant with you, but I demand one thing of you, namely, that you shall not see my face unless you first bring Michal, Saul's daughter, when you come to see me. In other words, David says, sounds like a good plan, but I want my wife back. And so, Abner brings David's wife back, and the guy that's been married to her is crying all the way to the border. I mean, you cannot make this stuff up. And I can't come up with a similar circumstance that's current. I don't have one. Anyway, so I'll just put it this way: verses 17. Really through the end, through like 26, Abner is brought back into the house of David. Okay, verse 20, Abner and 20 men came with him to David at Hebron, and David made a feast for Abner, and the men were with him. And Abner said to David, let me arise and go and gather all Israel to my Lord, that they may make a covenant with you, etc., etc. And behold, the servants, this is 22, of David and Joab came from a raid. Oh no, it's not going to get better. It's not going to get better. Verse 22, servants of David and Joab came from the raid and brought much spoil with them, but Abner was not with David in Hebron, for he had sent him away, etc., etc. When Joab and all the army that was with him arrived, they told Joab, Abner the son of Ner came to the king, and he has sent him away, and he has gone in peace. And Joab says, what? And somewhere in Joab's mind, he's thinking, this guy's going to get a higher position than me. I can't have that. What did I say here? Egos may be difficult to master, but godly spirituality and an authenticity must guide us. He says, what have you done? 24, Abner came to join you. Why then you sent him away, and why is he already gone? You know Abner, the son of Ner, that he came to deceive you and learn on your going out and your coming in to find that, oh my word, it's a conspiracy. It's huge. Don't you... When Joab came out from David, he sent messengers after Abner, and they brought him back from the well of Sarah, but David did not know it. So when Abner returned to Hebron, Joab took him aside in the middle of the gate to speak private with him, and there he struck him in the belly so that he died on account of the blood of Ashiel, his brother. In other words, there was a relationship there. It's a feud. You hurt me, I'm going to hurt you because I'm afraid that you're usurping my authority, and I want what you think you have. Complicated, isn't it? And David is in the background of all this, just wanting things to work out and trying to chart a course that suggests that he's not part of the melee. You talk about a hard line to follow. It's always hard to choose sides, isn't it? Whose side do I choose? And so let me simply give you my thinking here in a second. I'm always going to be on God's side. That's it. And it's interesting to me. I noticed in my pastoral years, there were always people trying to get me on their side. And the hardest thing in ministry, in leadership, is to make sure you're on God's side. And that's good enough. I could tell you some things, but I won't. And so David finds himself in chapter 3, verse 28. Joab has murdered Abner. Look at verse 28. Afterward, when David heard it, he said, I and my kingdom are innocent before the Lord forever of the blood of Abner, the son of Ner. What does David do? He has an affinity for Joab, but Joab has exercised his own ego and exterminated the life of a rival. Look at 29. I think this is David's attempt to chart a course, not so much of neutrality, but of righteousness. Because he says in 29, may it fall on the head of Joab and on all of his father's house, and may there not fail from the house of Joab one who has a discharge, or who is a leper, or who takes hold of a distaff, or who falls by the sword, or who lacks bread. So Joab and Abishai the brother killed Abner because he had put Ashiel to death in the battle of Gibeon. Now notice this further. David said to Joab and all the people who were with him, tear your clothes and gird on sackcloth and lament before Abner. In other words, it is, I think, his way of demonstrating that he is not pleased with the actions of Joab, but, having said that, he needs Joab. He does not put Joab to death. He attempts to create a situation, I think, where he tries to exhibit or extract some remorse from Joab. Which leads me to number 3, and I've got to hurry. We're going to probably leave a little of this go. But number 3, opportunity may be knocking, but obedience to the will of God must be our priority. It seems to me that God has told David in the past that he will be king. But, you know, if you're looking at this on a horizontal level, if you're looking at this at right on normal level, you're going, how in the world is this ever going to work out? And I find it is important at this point for David to when we say trust God, what I mean is it is important for David to set his sights on what his priorities are and allow God to work in his time and in his way. And if you look at the latter part of these verses in 31 through the end of the chapter, you kind of understand that David is attempting to lead a course of remorse and confession for this event that has happened. In fact, if you look at verse 38, then the king said to his servants, this is 3:38, do you not know that a prince and a great man has fallen this day in Israel? I am weak today, though anointed king, and these men, the sons of Zeruiah, are too difficult for me. Isn't that an honest admission? I'm in a spot. And people have put me in a spot because they're seeking their own agenda and their own elevation. And I'll simply save you some time here. And chapter 4 is more of the same. They do Ishbosheth in. Look at verse 5. I'll save you a little time. So the sons of Rimmon the Beerothite, Rechab and Baanah, departed and came to the house of Ishbosheth in the heat of the day, while he was taking his midday nap. They came into the middle of the house as if to get wheat, and what is it about the belly? They struck him in the belly, okay, and killed him and beheaded him. Why? Well, they wanted to demonstrate to David their loyalty. They haven't got the memo that says David doesn't do well with that kind of thing. Remember 2 Samuel 1? Okay. They took his head and traveled by the way of Arabah all night. Then they brought the head of Ishbosheth to David at Hebron and said to the king, behold, wonderful Old Testament word, look, we did you a favor. Because I think they wanted status. Opportunity may be knocking, but obedience to the will of God must be our priority. Behold, the head of Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, your enemy, who sought your life. Thus the Lord has given my lord the king vengeance on this day on Saul and his descendants. Wow, we done good. I mean, it sounds so patriotic, doesn't it? We've removed for you your enemy. They have not been listening to 1 Samuel or 2 Samuel 1, 1 Samuel 31. David answered Rechab and Baanah, his brother, the sons of Rimmon, the Beerothite, and said to them, and I think this is a good way to end, because it reminds us again how important obedience. Your number one goal in life, folks, as is mine, is to follow wholeheartedly and singularly after the will of God as revealed in his scriptures, not as revealed in any one guy. As the Lord lives, who has redeemed my life, I love this, from all distress. When one told me, saying, behold, Saul is dead, and though he thought he was bringing good news. At this point, these boys, I think, have realized that they made a horrible mistake. I seized him and killed him in Ziklag, which was the reward I gave him for his news. Not the payment they were looking for. How much more, verse 11, when wicked men have killed a righteous man, interesting, in his own house, on his bed, shall I not now require his blood from your hand and destroy you from the earth? What I admire here is not David's technique necessarily. But this single-minded desire, no matter what happens, to honor the work of God in his life, even if it wasn't to his liking and even if it put him in jeopardy, he still has an understanding of how important God had, or the priority God had, of authority and righteousness. And so, verse 12, then David commanded the young men, and they killed them and cut off their hands and feet. I don't know. Is that overkill? Interestingly enough, if you've read Fox's Book of Martyrs, which isn't exactly bedtime reading, what's his name? Oh my word, it just left me. The New Testament, the first New Testament English copy, no. Oh, I can't think of it. Say it again. No, this is first English New Testament translated. Can't think of it. But anyway, they were so upset with him when he did that that they strangled him and then burned him at the stake just to make sure. For emphasis. Catholic Church did, actually. David commended the young men, and they killed him and cut off his hands and feet, and they hung him up beside the pool in Hebron. They took a head of Ishbosheth and buried it in the grave of Abner in Hebron. And David now becomes king after all of that. And we think the presidential selection process is a mess. I'm not saying it isn't. What I am saying is if you understand the nature of men and women, you understand that these things are consistent with a people who do not love God at some point or have their motives confused. Which reminds us as believers, we should try as hard as we can to live above the fray and live for righteousness. Let's bow together. Father, thank you for these people. You know, Father, I don't have all the answers, and oh my word, over the years I've had enough trouble controlling my own attitude and my own ego and my own pride. Those are all issues that if we're honest with ourselves, we have to deal with at some point. I only offer these insights as a matter of both experience and what I have perceived from your word. And I understand that your will continue for our country, our nation, for our world, and that it will, even though it seems obtuse and difficult to understand, we are proceeding towards the consummation of your plan. And to that I say, even so, come quickly, Lord Jesus. Thank you for these people, for their attentiveness and their interest. And I pray that you would bless them even as we go our way now. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thanks.